Hello everybody, so today is another longer video on Mozambique. By watching the video we hope you will understand the basic rules of corporate immigration into Mozambique. We know the video is a bit longer than usual, but I promise it's worth it, so stay tuned. And to make it more fun to watch it, I thought I ask Melissa here on my right to join me today. She's an expert in Mozambique and has done some pretty impressive large projects in the past in Mozambique. So yeah, let's start. So as an opening question, maybe Melissa, how would you rate overall the immigration system in Mozambique when it comes to timelines, reliability, complexity, on a scale from 1 to 10?
So I think I'd rate Mozambique a 6. The reason being is it's quite a complicated immigration regime. Also, it's not one that's extremely reliable, and sometimes I question whether it's in the favor of the foreign assignee coming to work there. Okay,
cool. So maybe to start, and we will move into short-term and long-term and families later on, but a typical question we get in Africa a lot. So is there any special rules when it comes to immigration for certain sectors in Mozambique?
So definitely, and especially for oil and gas, mining oil and gas in Mozambique. These sectors benefit from work permits that are issued for a longer validity. Typically, their processing times can be quicker, but also depending on the projects that these sectors are working in, they are maybe even exempted from certain types of visas, as well as how the visas are obtained.
And then obviously for the large gas exploration, some of the companies like Cecil or E&I have separate rules, right?
Yes,
so they have negotiated separate route. So it's always important to know on which projects sub-providers are working. All right, so overall, how's the adjudication quality? Is it reliable once it comes out? I know it takes time, but I mean, are there lots of mistakes being made? How is it in Mozambique?
So I would say it depends on the province you're submitting in. Maputo is quite reliable, Pemba maybe not so much.
Okay, so maybe just for the viewers to explain, I mean, you rightfully would assume maybe there's only one place to submit. No, in Mozambique actually you need to apply for your immigration or for your labor in the province, right? Where the project is based, and that can be 2,000 kilometers north of Maputo, or it can be Maputo or in between. But anyway, moving on. So let's start with visitor visas and short-term work permits or visas. Now, obviously, and the viewer needs to be patient here. Mozambique is quite complex because they actually distinguish between the entry visas and then obviously the work permission. So maybe, Melissa, over to you. Explain us the basics there when it comes to the entry visas and maybe also even the short-term work visas.
Okay. So in Mozambique, you need to obtain your activity or your permit for activity, so work in this example, prior to obtaining an entry visa. So for short-term work permits, for example, you would obtain a short-term work permit in the province where the work is being conducted, like you rightfully said, as a first step. Once the short-term work permit has been issued, you would then need to apply for a short-term work visa, and this is usually done in your country of residence or country of origin at the Mozambican embassy. Only then can you fly to Mozambique and legally conduct work.
And do you have to then change the entry visa into something else, or is it fine for the short-term period?
So it would also depend on where you are receiving the visa from. So some embassies, for example, Johannesburg in South Africa, actually issue you with a visa for the full validity of the work permit. Whereas in the UK, they would issue you maybe with 90 days and your work permit is issued for 180 days, and you would then need to extend that visa once you are in Mozambique.
And the 180 days is oil and gas sector and mining, right? And normally it's 90 days.
Yes, normally it's 90 days.
So normally it's 90 days, and then in oil and gas and mining it's 180.
Correct.
And the 90 days, can it be extended?
So the 90 days can be extended, but this is solely to the discretion of the immigration in Mozambique.
Okay. And then maybe what activities, are there any activities you're allowed to do on a tourist visa actually?
Other than being a tourist, no.
So you would have to apply always for a business visa as soon as moves into any meetings or conferences or conducting training, the usual thing.
Yes, and I would strongly suggest that you stick to the business visa if needed. Obviously, for South Africans, we're visa exempt, for example, so we can just fly into Maputo and go and conduct work on a tourist visa. They do tend to do inspections quite often in Mozambique in comparison to other countries, so it's very important to obtain the correct visa.
And the short-term, so for short-term work, where is there a line? So, I mean, let's say attending a conference, does that require only a business visa or actually the work permission?
So for attending a conference, you would be able to do that on a business visa.
Okay. So it depends on what activities you actually do, if it's a work permission or actually purely the business visa.
Yes,
okay.
That's correct.
All right. And then maybe moving on to the long-term permits. So what kind of long-term work permits are there in Mozambique?
So there are two typical long-term work permits in Mozambique. One is an in quota and the other is an out of quota. So what quota means is based on the amount of local staff you have at your company, you get a certain percentage of foreigners allowed to work in Mozambique. So once you've exceeded that quota amount or that percentage, you then need to apply for an outside of quota work permit.
And which one is easier? I guess the in quota.
Definitely in quota.
Okay, so and for out of quota, why is it so much more complex, and what are the processing times for both?
Okay, so for in quota, processing times you're looking at roughly anywhere between, I would say, 6 to 12 weeks, whereas out of quota can take up to 6 months.
Okay.
And the reason for this is obviously because, well, not obviously, but because the minister actually needs to sign off on the actual outside of quota, and then only the work permit can be processed through labor.
Okay, and just, I mean, you said that usually you first apply for the labor permission, so the work part at the Department of Labor, and then you deal with the visas, right?
Yes.
So for inside quota, outside quota, I assume it's the same thing.
Yes.
So you first go to labor, apply for either inside quota or outside quota. Once labor says yes, you can then apply for the entry visa, which would be actually a work visa. Correct. And not a tourist visa, and not a business visa, so it needs to be a corresponding correct entry visa for the work permission.
That is 100% spot on.
I'm good at that. The listening still works, so that's good. Okay, and then how long are they issued for?
So work permits are typically issued for 2 years, and then your work visa is issued only for 1 year. So what would happen is the embassy typically would issue you again with the work visa now, probably up to 90 days, right? Then you would enter Mozambique and convert this work visa into a so-called residence or dira, as they call it in Mozambique. And this is then extended to up to a year.
Yes.
And you can renew this dira as long as your work permit remains valid.
So basically we show, we have work permission for 2 years. You go to which, you don't go to labor, then you go to migration and say, I need a dira for another year.
Yes, correct.
Okay, understood. All right. And then after the 2 years, you can obviously apply for a new one.
Yes.
And it's the same new application. It's not easier, but just because it's an extension.
Yeah. So it is probably a bit easier because your certificate of equivalence you don't necessarily need to do again. And this is equivalent to our SACWA certificate in South Africa. And this is a lifelong valid certificate. So you wouldn't need to do it again for the renewal. So you actually save a few weeks of processing, but it needs to be included in the renewal.
And the certificate of equivalence, do we need this for an in quota as well, or only for outside quota?
So it depends on the position, but we always advise clients to obtain it for both in quota and out of quota, because sometimes the authorities can say that they would like to see the certificate of equivalence, so it's always better to have the document.
Okay. And then the next question we usually ask in these kind of videos is there an additional residence? But we have talked about the last 2 or 3 minutes now about that. So in Mozambique, clearly you have that distinguishing factor between labor permission and the residence. And Melissa just explained that you need to convert your entry visa into a residence. So I think we can skip that one. And then what obligations does the employer have when the employment ends?
So again, like other African countries, the employer needs to notify the authorities that the assignee has now left, and IBN can submit the cancellation of work permit application to the necessary authorities.
Okay. Moving on to the family. So what options does an accompanying family have? So spouse and maybe a child or 2 children. Are there study visas? What's the options in Mozambique?
So the options would typically be dependent permits for the spouse and minor children, and then again study permits for children attending school.
And then they are issued for up to 1 year, I assume, in line with the DIRA of the main applicant?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, all right. Any special definitions of dependence? Can you bring parents in or frail parents into Mozambique?
So practically I haven't tried this one yet, but we have a very reliable own office in Mozambique, and Karin will definitely be able to advise on how to practically go around doing this. But there is no space in the Immigration Act or regulations for this specific permit.
And the definition of spouse, must you be married or can you be life partners? How does it work in Mozambique?
So you can be life partners in Mozambique as well. But again, here you would need to be able to show that you are legally life partners in your country of origin, and you have to be heterosexual.
So no homosexual life partnerships either?
No.
Okay. All right. Then maybe, are there any particulars, anything else, red flags you feel we should share with the viewers about Mozambique, except for, I think long lead times, I believe, and the complexity, right? But anything else?
So all documentation needs to be in Portuguese. That's very important. So when submitting the application, even at the embassies in your country of residence, you would need to have the documentation translated. IBN can definitely assist with the translation. The documentation that needs to be provided in Mozambique for the work permit needs to be notarized documents. So if the employer can't get around to getting their documentation notarized, our IBN Mozambique office can assist with that as well.
So there's quite a bit of formality to be adhered to as well.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, well, thank you, Melissa, for this.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you have any questions regarding Mozambique, please contact us. You will find all the contact details below the video. If you found the video useful, please share this with other viewers and like the video. And otherwise, just maybe check out some other videos on African immigration. Keep well and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.